The afternoon in the Cambridge University Library is always bathed in an aged light, where dust particles drift slowly in the beams streaming through the tall windows, like messengers forgotten by time. Ben Archer's fingertips glided along the spines of the books on the third shelf, the scent of aging leather and paper drifting into his nostrils, mingling with the foggy aroma carried from outside, moist with the Thames humidity. That smell always made his fingers tingle, as if countless tiny electric currents were dancing beneath his skin. He had been searching for a 19th-century monograph on urban history, but as he reached out to pull a book from the shelf, his thumb brushed against an unusually protruding volume. It was a hardcover book bound in dark blue cloth. The gilded title time and the city on the spine faded and dulled, its corners worn to expose the gray cardboard underneath. The moment Ben's fingers touched the cover, a sudden dizziness seized him. Not the ordinary kind, but a more bizarre sensory disorientation. The acrid stench of damp coal smoke burned his throat, the whistle of a steam train rang in his ears, and a woman's East London accent screamed, "The fog's too thick." The sensation lasted barely half a second. When he shook his head to regain his composure, the library remained filled with the rustle of turning pages and the distant footsteps of a librarian. "Strange thing," he muttered, pulling the book out. It was heavier than it looked. On the title page was a 1935 Cambridge University Library accession stamp, beneath which was a row of jagged signatures, as if scratched with a fountain pen nib. Ben flipped to the back page and pulled out the yellowed library card from its slot. His breath caught in his throat. The card bore borrow records dating back to 1936, most sparse until the row marked 1953. That year's section was crammed with 37 names, from Arthur White in January to Lillian Clark in December. Their occupations varied: teacher, laborer, shop assistant, even a milkman. But what chilled Ben to the bone was that all the signatures were identical. Slanting penmanship, the crossbar of each T tilted leftward, and every period capped with a tiny hook. Ben took a photo of the card with his phone and ran his fingertip over the signatures again. Dizziness struck once more, clearer this time. A bony hand gripping a fountain pen, scribbling rapidly on the card against a backdrop of thick yellow fog, while Big Ben chimed 3 times in the distance. He snatched his hand back, nearly dropping his phone. "Are you all right, sir?" A librarian in a navy uniform approached, his gaze falling on the book. Time and the City. It's rarely checked out. Fighting to contain his excitement, Ben pointed to the card. "These 1953 signatures, they're all the same. Have you noticed?" The librarian frowned, flipped through the book, and shook his head. Probably a student prank, or the circulation desk staff signing on behalf of borrowers. The 1953 records were archived long ago. No one bothers to check them. His tone was casual, as if dismissing a trivial matter, but Ben noticed his fingers trembled slightly when they touched the signatures. That afternoon, Ben checked the book out and took it back to his attic apartment in South London. From the window, he could see the spire of the Shard piercing the sky. The room was cluttered with old objects: a brass pocket watch left by his grandmother, a vintage camera bought at a flea market, and a box of crumpled papers covered in equations. Ben was a physics graduate student at University College London, specializing in time crystals, but what truly fascinated him was the oddity he'd had since childhood. He called it time synesthesia. When touching certain old objects, he would suddenly be plunged into a moment from the past, experiencing its sounds, smells, even emotions. Doctors dismissed it as hallucinations caused by excessive anxiety, but his grandmother had always said, "It's a gift, Ben. Unfinished stories looking for you." Mary Archer, his grandmother, was a survivor of the 1952 London smog, a disaster that had claimed her husband, Ben's grandfather. She used to say strange things: "There are other trains in the fog. Some people didn't leave, they're just trapped." A year before her death, she'd given Ben a locked wooden box, saying, Open it when you can understand the fog's whispers. Ben placed time and the city on his desk and opened his laptop, importing the photo of the library card into image analysis software. He adjusted the contrast and zoomed in on the signatures. Pixel-level scanning revealed identical pressure distributions, pen speeds, and even ink blot patterns. It was impossible for 37 different people to have written them. He logged into the Cambridge University Library database and typed in Arthur White. The profile that popped up made his pupil's contract. Arthur White had been born in April 1955, still an unborn fetus in 1953. He cross-referenced each name on the list, his heart sinking with every check. Of the 37 names, 15 had not yet been born in 1953, and 10 had been officially declared dead in the December 1952 smog disaster. Among them was a nurse named Ethel Green, whose death certificate was dated December 5th, the exact day the 1745 train crashed. Ben slumped into his chair, his fingers drifting aimlessly over the keyboard, when a notification popped up from Professor Hawkins, a history of science professor at Cambridge. Ben had emailed him the previous week about time crystal theories. The professor's reply read, "Your hypothesis about temporal residue in objects echoes a classified 1983 document I once saw, attributed to the time trace division. All subsequent related materials were classified top secret. P.S. Someone has been inquiring about your research. Be careful." The fog outside had thickened, blurring the shard into a gray smudge. Ben walked to the window and pressed his fingertips against the cold glass. Time synesthesia surged unbidden, clearer than ever. 1953, the Cambridge University Library. A man in a black trench coat leaned over a library card, signing it. A faint yellow fog stain dotted his cuff, and the pen in his hand bore a tiny engraved "A," the same mark as his grandfather Arthur Archer's fountain pen. The man suddenly looked up, his face still hidden in shadow, but Ben felt his gaze pierce through time, locking onto his own. "Find them," a hoarse voice echoed in his mind. "The fog is breaking. This can't be," Ben muttered, typing frantically. He searched for 1953 London abnormal library loans, but found nothing. Just then, his screen flickered black, and an anonymous email window popped up. Sender address a jumble of characters. Message a single line. City Hall server, 3:07 a.m. Find the ghost. Ella Wright stared at the streaming data on her screen, caffeine coursing through her veins, stinging her bloodshot eyes. As a temporary IT employee at London City Hall, her job should have involved handling public cyber complaints, not hacking her employer's server backend at 3 a.m. But 3 days earlier, she discovered an anomaly. A ghostly process lurking deep in the system, activating precisely at 3:07 a.m. every day to scan all files containing the keywords fog, 1952, and carriage, then sending the data to an encrypted overseas server. She tried tracing the process's origin, but all logs had been erased, leaving only a vague label, Time Trace Division. She'd never heard of the agency, but her intuition screamed it was no ordinary system maintenance. She'd posted the process's signature to a trusted hacker forum, hoping for leads, only to receive an anonymous reply, "Cambridge Library, time in the city, find Ben Archer." At that moment, the process activated again, green code cascading like a waterfall. Ella typed rapidly, trying to intercept the outgoing data, when the office door suddenly swung open. Corridor lights flooded in, casting a harsh beam. She slammed her laptop shut and spun around to see a man in a black trench coat standing in the doorway, his face expressionless. "Ms. Ella Wright?" His voice was deep, as if carried from a distance. "I'm Agent Gray of the Time Trace Division. I need to speak with you." Ella's heart raced, but she forced herself to stand. "Time Trace Division? I've never heard of it. Do you have a warrant?" Gray didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a silver badge from his pocket, engraved with a complex symbol, part clock hands, part intertwined railway tracks. We handle matters related to temporal anomalies, he said. The process you've been tracking is part of a classified project. Now, please come with me to assist with the investigation. Ella's hand crept toward the panic button under her desk, but just as her fingertip brushed it, Gray moved, faster than seemed human. He grabbed her wrist, his grip so tight it made her wince. "Don't resist," he said. "We don't want to hurt you." At that moment, Gray's phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tension. He released Ella's wrist and answered, his expression darkening. "What? Anomaly at the archives?" He shouted into the phone, then hung up and glared at Ella. "You're lucky. But remember, stay away from things that don't concern you. Next time, it won't just be a talk." After Gray's footsteps faded down the corridor, Ella collapsed into her chair, her palms soaked in sweat. She grabbed the silver device he'd left on her desk, a signal jammer, its red light blinking. She stuffed it into a drawer and reopened her laptop. A hidden folder popped up. Her automatic backup program had copied the Ghost process's core code to her local drive the moment Gray had grabbed her wrist. Buried in the code was a string of hidden IP addresses. It took Ella 40 minutes to decrypt them with a tracker she'd written. The addresses led to an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of London. But what was stranger was that the IP's physical location kept shifting, like a node floating in time and space. She pulled up satellite imagery and zoomed in on the observatory. There was a faint circular glow, its edges refracting like a rainbow, identical to the fog in the train crash photos she'd seen. 10 minutes later, she received a reply from Ben, with an address and time: 7 p.m. tonight, South Bank Center Cafe. The South Bank Center Cafe was bustling, jazz drifting through the air, mingling with the scent of coffee and fog from outside. Ben had chosen a window seat, a hidden voice recorder under the table. Professor Hawkins's warning had made him cautious. A cold latte sat in front of him, his fingers brushing the rim as his gaze remained fixed on the security camera above the door. When a woman in a black hoodie and sunglasses walked in, he noticed a fresh scratch on her right index knuckle, a telltale mark of a hacker, caused by rapid typing against keyboard edges. It was the signature trait of Night Fog, the hacker from the forum. The woman didn't sit immediately. Instead, she bent to tie her shoelace and whispered, "Man in a brown coat behind you. Followed me in 3 minutes ago. Silver badge on his collar." Ben glanced sideways. Sure enough, a man pretending to read a newspaper had a black trench coat sleeve peeking out from behind the pages. He lifted his coffee cup, pretending to take a sip, and whispered back, "Go to the bar. Order a hot cocoa with double sugar. I'll leave through the back door and wait for you on the bench along the Thames." 10 minutes later, Ben sat on the cold bench, watching Ella navigate the surveillance blind spots toward him. She'd removed her sunglasses, revealing bright, bloodshot eyes, and carried a plain canvas bag. "Time Trace Division tails hard," she said, placing the bag between them and unzipping it to reveal a modified laptop displaying real-time surveillance footage. "I installed a reverse tracker in their jammer. I can see Gray's movements for now." Ben pushed the photo of the library card across to her. "This book's 1953 loan records are all fakes. 37 borrowers, 15 weren't born yet, 10 were dead. And all their names are linked to a train that crashed in the 1952 fog. I checked the victim lists." Ella's pupils constricted. December 5th, 1952. The 1745 from Waterloo Station derailed in the fog. Official records say 37 died, but only 29 bodies were recovered. She pulled a USB drive from her bag and plugged it into a tablet. "I hacked the city archives. That Ghost process scans for files related to the crash every day." "The Time Trace Division," Ben murmured. "The librarian reacted strangely when I mentioned it. And my grandmother. She always said there was something else in the 1952 fog. He pulled a silver locket from around his neck and opened it, revealing an old photo. A young Mary Archer on a train platform, standing beside a man in a suit, fog swirling in the background. That's my grandfather. He was the train's driver. Official records say he died, but my grandmother insisted he was trapped. Ella swiped through the tablet and pulled up a blurry black and white photo. This is the crash site. See the fog beside the tracks? It's not ordinary, it's iridescent, like light refracting. Witnesses said they saw train shadows in the fog, and voices. She looked up, her gaze sharp. Your time synesthesia. It can help us find the truth. Ben stared. How do you know about my synesthesia? I read your papers, Ella said. Your hypothesis about object temporal memory was rejected by journals, but I know it's true. You can see fragments of the past by touching things. Can't you? She pushed the tablet toward him. This is the location of the London archives. It holds the original 1952 crash files, including the Time Trace Division's classified records. We need to get in there. The London Archives was a Victorian building in the city centre, its stone walls covered in ivy, a cornerstone inscribed with 1892, barely visible beneath the vines. A dim light glowed in the security booth, where two uniformed guards slouched over the desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside them. Ella had anonymously reported illegal activity there earlier, diverting most of the security team and leaving only these two temporary replacements. At 1 a.m., Ben and Ella hid in an alley across the street, watching the guard shift change. Ella pulled a set of micro-devices from her backpack. The jammer will disable the cameras for 3 minutes. I copied a staff ID card, but the basement level 3 archives have biometric security, fingerprint, and iris scan. Success rates only 60%. She pulled a clear plastic sheet from her pocket, printed with a faint fingerprint, extracted from a cleaner's glove. Iris data is synthetic. Ben nodded, clutching time and the city in his pocket. Before leaving, he touched the book again, and the time synesthesia had been clearer than ever. 1953, Cambridge Library. The man in the black trench coat signing the library card, his face hidden in shadow. But Ben recognized the pen, identical to his grandfather's, the AW, engraving on the cap worn almost smooth. Stranger still, beside him stood a man in a gray uniform, the night librarian from the London Archives, holding a set of keys with a tiny train model keychain. Go, Ella whispered, pressing the jammer. The security cameras flickered to static. They darted across the street, swiped open the door, and descended the dim corridor. The basement level 3 archives reeked of mold. Rows of no picture dangandai, craft paper file bags, lining the shelves, their labels faded. Ella switched on a flashlight, its beams sweeping the shelves. Time Trace Division files should be in the isolation zone at the back, marked T. Just as they reached the isolation zone door, footsteps echoed behind them. Not the heavy boots of security guards, but the soft patter of leather shoes on wood, light as a cat's, yet carrying an oppressive weight. Ben and Ella ducked behind a shelf, holding their breath. The craft paper bags smelled strongly of mold, mixed with an odd, cold scent, like old books frozen in ice. A man in a gray uniform approached, holding a set of keys. The tiny train model on the keychain glinted faintly in the flashlight beam. He wore no hat, his hair as white as fog-bleached wool, slightly hunched but standing unusually straight, walking on the balls of his feet, silent. Ben noticed the cuffs of his uniform were frayed, but his collar was buttoned tightly. His ID badge read librarian, the name field blank. The librarian stopped at the isolation zone door. Instead of unlocking it immediately, he lifted his hand and brushed the cold iron. His fingers were long and bony, nails neatly trimmed, calluses thick on his fingertips. from years of holding pens and keys. Ben's heart raced. This was the same hand he'd seen in the Time and the City Library card signatures. The librarian pulled out his keys. Ben's breath caught as he noticed a long scar on the man's finger, matching the hand in his synesthetic vision. He reached out instinctively, wanting to touch the librarian's sleeve, but the man suddenly turned around. Ben and Ella gasped. The librarian had no face, or rather, his face was like a shattered mirror, 37 different faces flickering across it. First an elderly woman with tears in her eyes, muttering, "My grandson." Then a schoolboy smudged with coal dust, clutching a textbook. Then a top-hatted gentleman with an askew tie, eyes filled with terror. Each face was vivid, as if within reach. Ben had seen them all in the 1952 crash victim photos. What was more eerie was how seamlessly the faces shifted, like flowing water. The librarian's lips moved, 37 voices, men, women, young, old, melding into one indistinct phrase. "The fog is coming." Ben's time synesthesia erupted. He felt his consciousness pulled into the librarian's body, 37 memory fragments exploding in his mind. The 1952 carriage, coal smoke choking the air, the screech of train brakes, women screaming and children crying, a man's voice shouting, "Stay calm, everyone, hold your positions." "The silent librarian," Ella whispered, fumbling with her phone to take photos. "He's mentioned in the city archives, guardian of the archives. No one's ever seen his true face." The librarian's gaze fell on Time and the City in Ben's hand. The faces stopped shifting, revealing Ben's grandfather's face. "Mary," he croaked, his voice like rusted metal. "Tell Mary. The fog is lifting." Ben stepped forward. "You know my grandmother? Is my grandfather alive?" The faces flickered again, chaos returning. Men shouting, women weeping, the crash's deafening roar. The librarian raised a hand, pointing to a filing cabinet in the isolation zone, then turned and strode into the dark corridor, disappearing from sight. Ben and Ella rushed to the cabinet. Ella picked the lock, and inside were a dozen file bags labeled 1952, Fog, Carriage. They pulled one out, and the contents made them gasp. A Time Trace Division internal report, dated December 10th, 1952, titled London Smog Temporal Anomaly Response Plan. The report stated, on December 5th, 1952, the London smog destabilized the space-time continuum. The 1745 from Waterloo Station fell into a temporal rift, trapping 37 passengers and crew in an overlapping dimension, creating temporal ghosts. The Time Trace Division had formed an emergency task force to debate a full memory wipe to erase all memories of the incident. At the bottom was a handwritten note: "Oppose full wipe. Preserve emotional memories. Edgar Weil." "Edgar Weil," Ella read aloud. "I researched him, one of the Time Trace Division's founders. Disappeared after 1952. Ben's fingers brushed the report. Time synesthesia surged again, this time not fragments, but a complete conversation. December 10th, 1952. The Time Trace Division's temporary headquarters, a former bank vault, its thick walls bulletproof, windows sealed with steel plates, only small grills letting in faint foggy light. A dozen men in black trench coats sat around a long table, cold tea and thick files marked "Top Secret" in front of them. Edgar Weil stood at the window, his back to the room, his black trench coat still damp with fog, a tiny train model pin, his father's 1898 steam train conductor badge, pinned to his collar. The fog had lingered for 6 days, Thames boats grounded, hospitals overflowing with smog victims. The Time Trace Division's monitors showed London's space-time curvature had exceeded safe limits, like a bow pulled too tight, ready to snap. "We must execute a full memory wipe," boomed the portly man at the head of the table, Harris, the Time Trace Division's deputy director, his jowls jiggling as he spoke. Per Section 7 of the Temporal Anomaly Response Act, when temporal ghost numbers exceed 30 with diffusion risk, all related memories must be erased. We have cabinet authorization. He pushed a document to the center. Prime Minister's signature scrawled across it, ink slightly smudged. They are people, not contaminants. While turned, his gaze as hard as steel, eyes bloodshot from days without sleep. 37 lives, trapped in the folds of time, not gone. A full wipe would erase every trace of their existence. Their families would forget them, history would delete them, as if they never lived. This isn't anomaly control. It's murder. But what happens if we don't? Asked a woman beside Harris, Evelyn, the Time Trace Division's chief researcher, holding a monitoring report. Last night, East London had its first space-time overlap. A woman saw a 1952 train carriage pass through her kitchen wall. If this spreads, London will descend into panic. People will question reality, social order will collapse. While walked to the table, picking up a file of the 37 victims' photos. An 18-year-old conductor, a mother holding an infant, an engineer traveling to London, a newlywed couple on their honeymoon. I spent 3 days at the crash site. His voice softened. I saw that young conductor shield a child with his body from flying debris. I saw that mother give her last breath of oxygen to her baby, suffocating herself. They're not threats, they're heroes. While fell silent, then sighed. I have a proposal. Blur the details, preserve the emotions. We can alter the crash records, make people forget the temporal rift and ghosts, but let them keep their fear of the fog, their grief for lost loved ones. These emotional memories will be a bridge to the overlapping dimension. One day, someone will find the truth through them. The room fell quiet. Finally, Harris nodded. Very well, but you'll oversee implementation. Any anomalies, and we trigger the full wipe immediately. Ben snapped back to reality, tears dripping onto the yellowed report, smudging the ink. He looked up to see Ella staring at a document, her face as pale as paper, fingers white with tension. Look at this, she whispered, handing it to him. Time Trace Division Budget Report. Since November 2015, a line item, Dimensional Isolation Maintenance, has skyrocketed. £5 million in November, £20 million in December, £50 million requested this month. She pointed to the attached analysis. It says the isolation barrier's energy consumption is 10 times expected. Temporal leakage from the archive layer is accelerating. Mass spacetime overlaps in London are predicted by December 15th. Ben stared at the graph, the red line representing leakage spiking upward like a dagger. He remembered his grandmother's final moments, lying in her hospital bed, barely breathing, clutching his hand, repeating, December 12th, Waterloo Station. The fog will return, Ben. This time, it won't take people. It will bring the truth. He'd thought it delirium then, but now he understood. It had been a warning from her residual temporal memory. We need more allies, Ben said, gripping the report until his knuckles whitened. Just the two of us, we can't fight the Time Trace Division, and we can't activate the Reality Merger Protocol alone. We need survivors or their descendants. Over the next month, Ben and Ella hunted for clues. Using the 1952 victim list, they cross-referenced survivors and their families. Ella hacked parts of the Time Trace Division's database. Discovering these individuals' files were marked priority surveillance. After eliminating those already handled by the agency, they found 3 key people. First was Anna Jones. Her grandmother Agnes had survived the crash, giving birth to Anna's father in the carriage before falling into a coma, rescued from the wreckage. In her later years, Agnes had Alzheimer's, but never forgot the 1952 fog. Every day, she'd leave a cup of hot milk by the window, saying, "When the train comes back, he'll be thirsty." Her husband, Anna's grandfather, had been the train's conductor. Second was Tom Smith. His grandfather, the crash rescue chief, had found a glowing metal box at the site containing the 37 passengers' personal belongings. He'd hidden the box and kept a diary filled with strange symbols, only to die in an accident, falling from scaffolding, the diary clutched in his hand. Third was Lucy Davis. Her father, a former Time Trace Division data analyst, had been executed in 1998 for leaking classified information. Before his death, he'd sent a package to the young Lucy. Encrypted files and a photo of the 1952 Time Trace Division team. Edgar while in the center, Lucy's father beside him. Lucy had grown up to be an investigative journalist, secretly probing her father's death and the 1952 smog truth. They met at a small pub. Anna, a painter, carried a sketchbook filled with foggy trains. Tom, an engineer, held his grandfather's diary, brows furrowed. Lucy, sharp-eyed, kept her voice recorder running. "The Time Trace Division has been watching us," Lucy said first, pulling out the photo. "These are their agents. Since 1952, they've been handling anyone connected to the crash." Tom opened the diary, pointing to a complex symbol. "My grandfather said this is the temporal rift marker. He saw dozens of them in the fog at the crash site, like light imprints. He said the trapped aren't dead. They're living in another now." Anna flipped to a sketch that made Ben freeze. A train traveling through iridescent fog, passengers smiling, 2015 London visible through the windows. "I didn't make this up," she said. "My grandmother told me about it before she died." She said, "They're watching us through the fog." Just then, Lucy's phone rang. Anonymous caller ID showing London Observatory. She exchanged a glance with Ben and put it on speaker. A deep male voice came through, faint static in the background. "I'm Analyst K from the Time Trace Division. Your operation has been compromised. Agent Gray will lead a raid tomorrow, starting with your safe house in East London, then everyone you've contacted." "How do we know you're not a trap?" Ella asked, hand drifting to the pepper spray under the table high-strength anesthetic she'd bought on the black market. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I know Edgar Wile's secret," the man said. "He didn't disappear. Harris had him imprisoned at an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of London, converted into the Time Trace Division's secret base for studying temporal contamination. And the 1952 report you have, Wile's signature at the bottom has a tiny train symbol. It's his personal mark." "Who are you? Why help us?" "Wile is my grandfather," the man said. "He founded the Time Trace Division to protect the truth, not bury it. Now Harris and his cronies have hijacked it, using temporal contamination to seize power." He paused. "The Ethics Committee has passed a resolution. If isolation fails, the reality merger protocol will be activated at the failure point, but it needs the original 1952 temporal coordinates as an anchor. While place them in the 1745 train's third carriage." "How do we find the coordinates?" Ben asked. "Seek the passengers' belongings, especially those with strong emotional resonance," Kay said. "Your time synesthesia can locate them. And on December 12, 2015, there will be a fog identical to 1952's. Perfect conditions to activate the protocol. I'll help, but hurry. Gray won't give you much time." After hanging up, the pub fell silent. Ben pulled out his grandmother's wooden box, walnut, carved with a train motif. "Grandmother said to open it when I could understand the fog's whispers. Now's the time." Ella used a small screwdriver to pry open the lock. Inside were a leather-bound diary and a fountain pen. Ben picked up the pen, and a violent dizziness overwhelmed him. This time, not fragments, but a complete memory. December 5, 1952. Waterloo Station. Mary Archer held their newborn daughter, saying goodbye to her husband Arthur. the 17:45's driver. He kissed her forehead, handing her the pen. "Name her when I get back." The train pulled away. Mary waved. Then fog surged, yellow and thick, swallowing the train. She heard Arthur's shout, the screech of derailment. She rushed forward, but police held her back. Iridescent light glowed in the fog. She saw Arthur's hand reaching for her, pulled back into the mist. "I'll find you, Arthur," she screamed, tears mixing with fog. Ben snapped back, clutching the pen, tears soaking its metal body. "I found the coordinates," he whispered, "beneath the floor of the third carriage." Ella pulled up the 1952 train's blueprints. The third carriage was crushed under the wreckage. It's in an abandoned London underground tunnel now. Kay says he can get us access, and a replica of the 1952 carriage, modified with modern tech. "December 12th, Tom said, checking the calendar. 7 days left. We need 3 things. Collective recordings of 1952 survivors to trigger emotional memories, a vintage generator to simulate the original electrical system, and fog mist matching the 1952 composition to recreate the weather conditions. For the next 7 days, the 5 worked frantically, basing themselves in Tom's grandfather's old workshop in East London's derelict factory district, far from Time Trace Division surveillance. The workshop was cluttered with old machinery. Tom spread his grandfather's diary on the workbench. The symbols now made sense: 1952 train circuit diagrams and temporal coordinate calculations. Anna tracked down all surviving crash witnesses, recording their memories. One recording brought everyone to tears. A 92-year-old man saying, "I was 5, in my mother's arms. She covered my mouth with her coat, said, 'Don't breathe the fog. Dad will come for us when it lifts.' I still remember her warmth. Her last words, 'I love you.'" Anna analyzed the recordings into emotional frequency spectrums, discovering they resonated at a specific frequency, the key to activating the temporal coordinates. Tom restored a 1952 vintage generator his grandfather had salvaged from the crash site, rusted and fog-stained. For 3 days and nights, he replaced coils and repaired gears. When he pressed the start button, the generator rumbled to life. The lights flickered, casting shadows of the 1952 carriage on the walls. Temporal resonance had begun. Lucy used her journalist credentials to track down the elderly meteorologist who'd monitored the 1952 smog, obtaining the fog's composition report. It revealed the 1952 fog contained not just coal smoke and dust, but special temporal particles that would peak again on December 12, 2015. She also uncovered that Harris, the current Time Trace Division director, had been the driving force behind the full memory wipe. His brother had died in the 1952 crash, and he'd always blamed Wiles' mercy for his brother's unrest. Ella collaborated with Kay to modify the replica carriage. She installed holographic projectors under the floor to simulate the 1952 interior, data reception antennas in the ceiling to capture signals from different time layers, and electromagnetic shielding around the carriage to block Time Trace Division interference. Kay smuggled them the Reality Merger Protocol's activation program, which required both the original temporal coordinates and the 37 passengers' emotional memories as dual keys. Ben practiced controlling his time synesthesia, sitting in the workshop's corner, clutching his grandfather's pen, letting his consciousness drift into the time stream. At first, he saw only fragments, but with practice, he learned to focus. He saw 1852 London, the poet Thomas sitting in a foggy cafe, coughing blood as he wrote with a quill. 1952, his grandfather Arthur checking the train's dials, face full of hope. Even 2052 London, holographic ads floating in the air, temporal contamination zones marked with special signs. On the morning of December 12th, fog engulfed London, identical to 1952 and 2015. Ben, Ella, Anna, Tom, and Lucy arrived at the abandoned underground tunnel entrance. Kay waited for them, masked and in a black trench coat, holding a tablet. Gray's discovered the plan. He's on his way with reinforcements. You have 40 minutes. The tunnel was damp and dark, walls covered in moss, water dripping from the ceiling like the ticking of a clock. The replica third carriage sat on the tracks, deep green, identical to the 1952 original, smudged with simulated coal smoke. Only the cold blue glow of modern screens visible through the windows. They stepped inside, the scent of old leather and metal filling their noses. Ella activated the fog machine at the front. Yellow mist filled the carriage, carrying a faint coal smoke aroma. Tom's replication of the 1952 fog. Tom started the vintage generator. The lights flickered from blue to 1950s warm yellow, the generator's rumble echoing through the tunnel, vibrating eardrums. Anna pressed play on the recorder. Survivors' voices filled the carriage, different accents, different emotions, all converging on that single moment. The fog's too thick, the driver's slowing down. Darling, don't be afraid. I'm here. Mommy, I'm cold. Agnes, hold on, the baby's coming. When Agnes's voice echoed, Anna burst into tears. It was the first time she'd heard her grandmother's voice, filled with the pain of childbirth and maternal strength. Ben closed his eyes, clutching the pen. He felt time surging around him, the carriage walls growing transparent. The 1952 third carriage appeared before him. Agnes lying on a bench, pale, surrounded by female passengers. The conductor checking tickets, smiling. His grandfather Arthur in the driver's seat, calling back to the carriage. 5 minutes to departure, everyone. Dad! Ben gasped. Arthur's smile froze. He stood, walking toward Ben. You're Mary's grandson. Ben nodded, tears flowing. Grandmother waited for you. She believed you were alive until the end. We're trapped, Arthur said. In the fog, time stands still for us. We can see your world, hear your voices, but never touch. The coordinates are beneath the floor, along with our last words. We want the world to know we weren't an accident. We were forgotten by time. Ben knelt, his hand brushing the floor. Through time synesthesia, the wood turned transparent, revealing a stack of yellowed letters and a metal box. He called Tom over. They pried up the floorboards, retrieving the letters and box. The letters were the 37 passengers' last words, notes to loved ones, farewells to the world. Inside the metal box was a small tracking device engraved with the time trace division symbol, the original temporal coordinates. Heavy footsteps and flashlight beams erupted outside. Gray rushed in with a dozen black-cloaked agents, holding specialized electromagnetic guns, weapons that could disrupt temporal particles, dispersing temporal ghosts and fatally wounding those with time synesthesia. Don't move! Gray's voice echoed through the tunnel, sharp with rage. His gaze swept over the five, landing on the metal box in Ben's hand. Hand over the temporal coordinates, and I'll spare your lives. Fog glistened on his trench coat, his silver badge glowing coldly. Director Harris says once we have the coordinates, we can erase these temporal garbage once and for all, restore London to normal. Normal! Lucy stepped forward, holding up her recorder. Your version of normal is erasing 37 lives? Condemning their families to live in lies? My father was executed for opposing you. She pressed play, her father's voice, a recorded testament. Lucy, remember, time is not about isolation, but connection. The forgotten memories are the most precious treasure. Ella activated the data transfer, sending the passenger's last words and coordinates to an encrypted server. We've backed up the data. Even if you arrest us, the truth will be revealed. Gray's face turned livid. He raised the electromagnetic gun, aiming at Ben's chest. Don't force me. I don't want to kill anyone. But if you interfere with the time trace division's duties, I won't hesitate. His finger hovered over the trigger, His grandfather had died in the 1952 crash, and Harris had told him only erasing the temporal ghosts would let his grandfather rest in peace. "Stop, Gray." An elderly voice boomed from the tunnel entrance, heavy with age. Everyone turned. An old man with white hair, neatly combed, walked in, leaning on a cane, wearing an old black trench coat, the train model pin on his collar, Edgar Weil. Behind him were two lab-coated technicians pushing a wheelchair covered in blankets. "Found her." Gray stared, the gun nearly slipping from his hand. "I thought Director Harris had you. Imprisoned for 20 years, Wall said, tapping his cane on the floor. He thought controlling me meant controlling the time trace division, controlling time. But he forgot. Time's power can't be ruled by force. He nodded at the wheelchair. The technicians pulled back the blankets, revealing a device covered in dials, its screen displaying London's space-time curvature map. This is a temporal anchor. It stabilizes overlapping zones, preventing disaster. Wall walked to the carriage center, looking at the passenger's last words, tears glistening in his eyes. In 1952, I opposed the full memory wipe for this day. Time's order isn't maintained by hiding the truth, but by understanding and accepting it. These temporal ghosts aren't threats. They're our past, this city's memories. He turned to Gray. The Ethics Committee has passed a new resolution. Harris's tyranny is over. From today, the Time Trace Division becomes the Temporal Layer Annotation and Mediation Agency. Our mission is to help those trapped in temporal rifts return home, not erase them. Gray's arm fell, the gun clattering to the floor. He stared at the iridescent fog, the ghosts growing clearer, and suddenly buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. My grandfather was on that train, Wall patted his shoulder. Now we can bring him home. Ben opened the metal box, activating the original temporal coordinates. The device emitted a soft blue light, spreading into a circle that enveloped the carriage. The iridescent fog swirled into a vortex, the 1952 third carriage at its center. The ghosts solidified, their forms no longer transparent, clothes and faces shifting from terror to calm. Arthur stood before Ben, a smudge of coal dust on his cheek, eyes filled with joy. Ben felt his touch warm, rough, the calluses of a lifetime holding a train's steering wheel. Thank you, son. Was Mary well? I tried to return, but the fog trapped me. I watched her grow old, watched you born, watched you grow. Grandmother was happy, Ben choked. She never stopped believing. She left me your pen, said it was a link between us. I knew, Arthur smiled, glancing toward the carriage door. A woman in a blue dress stood there, young Mary holding a baby, smiling. She left a white rose by the window every day. I could see it, smell it. He turned to the others. Friends, we're going home. The vortex grew larger, pulling the 37 ghosts into it. When the fog cleared, the carriage fell silent. Only the passengers' letters and the pen remained, proof of what had happened. In the days that followed, the Time Trace Division was officially renamed the Temporal Layer Annotation and Mediation Agency. While resumed leadership, Gray becoming the new operations chief, tasked with finding other temporal ghosts trapped in rifts. Ben and Ella didn't reveal the full truth. They knew the world needed time to accept such a radical reality. Together with Anna, Tom, and Lucy, they built a decentralized temporal memory network, divided into 3 layers. The physical layer, memory beacons, holographic projectors installed at 37 temporal anomaly sites across London, solar-powered and tamper-proof. Each beacon stored a temporal fragment, a passenger's last word, a poet's 1852 verse, a 2052 vision. The digital layer, an encrypted database containing all temporal anomaly data, the complete 1952 crash files, passenger letters, and photos. Time-locked, it would gradually decrypt on December 12, 2052, ensuring the truth could never be buried again. The encryption key was split into 5 parts, held by Ben, Ella, Anna, Tom, and Lucy. Only together could they modify the data. The human layer, the Urban Memory Oral History Project, a non-profit organization inviting anyone with temporal anomaly experiences to share their stories. These stories were compiled into books, documentaries, and art exhibitions, displayed in London's museums. Anna's painting Train in the Fog became the centerpiece, 37 ghosts smiling, walking toward light, touching millions. Ben opened his grandmother's diary. The last page read, "When the fog returns, don't fear it. It's the call of loved ones." He placed the diary and pen in a museum, the plaque beside them reading, "In 1952, they were trapped in the fog. In 2015, we brought them home." On December 12, 2052, fog once again covered London, identical to 1952 and 2015. At 3:07 p.m., the 37 memory beacons activated simultaneously, projecting holograms of 7 overlapping Londons into the sky. An 1852 steam train whistling through fog, 1952 passengers embracing waiting loved ones, the 2015 team activating the device in the tunnel, 2052 crowds recording the historic moment. The 7 layers merged into a century-spanning tapestry, fog flowing like a river connecting past and future. On the London Eye observation deck, a young man named Elias held a holographic camera. He was Mary Archer's great-grandson, a new observer at the Temporal Layer Annotation and Mediation Agency. In his pocket was an old diary, Ben Archer's gift to his mother. The last page read, "We are not time's masters, but its guardians. Every forgotten story deserves to be remembered." Elias stared at the holograms. Young Ben and Ella, Anna's painting flowing in light, his great-grandfather Arthur embracing Mary. He thought of his grandmother's childhood stories, the diary's words, and understood the observer's true purpose. Not surveillance, but inheritance, ensuring every era's memories echoed through time. A little boy tugged his mother's hand, pointing at the holograms. "Mommy, are those ghosts?" She shook her head, smiling. "No, darling. They're stories, the city's memories." The boy reached out, his fingertip passing through the hologram, touching a wisp of warm fog. In the distance, Big Ben chimed 3 times, its toll echoing through the fog, heavy with a century of history. The fog lifted, revealing a clear blue sky, sunlight gilding London's streets. The boy turned to see an elderly man standing nearby, wrinkled but vibrant, holding a dark blue cloth-bound book, Time and the City. The man smiled warmly, then turned and vanished into the crowd. The man was Ben Archer, 92 years old, still walking London streets every day with the book, feeling the city's temporal pulse. He knew the 37 1952 souls had finally found peace, their stories written into history, remembered by generations. And he knew time's journey was far from over. Future, temporal anomalies, new observers, new stories awaited. The boy would never know the elderly man's identity, or that the book in his hand carried a century of love and memory. In this city, fog would come again, but no one would fear it, for they knew the fog's echoes were the call of loved ones, time's greatest gift. London's sunlight broke through clouds, sparkling on the Thames. The forgotten stories, the trapped souls, had finally found their way home in the century's fog. And the city, flowing through time, had learned to embrace its past and welcome its future.